Hey, I'm Jamie Miller. Welcome to Inspired by Nature. Inspired by Nature is a pilot podcast. It's 12 episodes that dig into a variety of topics that relate to biomimicry. So if you've never heard of biomimicry, by definition, it's innovation that's inspired by nature. But more deeply, it's a shift in the lens that we use to relate to nature and design. So I'm really fascinated by this contrast, this glaring contrast between the built environments that we've created as a human species and the natural one. Even though we are nature, we've somehow created this vast separation, this gradient between us and the rest of the natural world. And I'm curious as to why we did it, the impacts it's having on us, and how we can dissipate that gradient. So in this 12 episode pilot, I'm going to speak to a variety of professionals, of practitioners, of Indigenous knowledge holders who will help me transform my understanding of design in nature. I want to continue what I'm calling this biomimicry frontier to explore whether this is the methodology and the mindset that could actually have positive, lasting impact on our environmental degradation, whether it can help mitigate climate change, because I've got this feeling that biomimicry is perhaps the only true model to help us get to where we need to go. So I'm excited for you to join me in these conversations as we deepen the lens, we deepen the relationship with nature and design, and start to see humans as not a bad species, but just a very young one. My biomimicry journey started in 2004, 17 years ago. I was a young engineering student studying civil engineering. I was learning the traditional methods, ideas on how to design built environments using physics and math. But in the entire time I was taking these courses, there was this underlying feeling, this gut feeling that there had to be another way of doing things. And I'm not sure if you've ever had that feeling where it's just like, it doesn't seem like this is the only way, but you couldn't put your finger on what else there was. You're too naive, perhaps, to the broader context and the broader opportunities. So it wasn't until a third year elective that I took called Math and Poetry. In the class, we spent an hour and a half on math and an hour and a half exploring poems. And in each section, the professors were like this beautiful conductor, walking us through these theorems or these poems in a way that made us feel like we were discovering them for the first time. In one particular class, we looked at something called the Fibonacci sequence. It's a sequence of numbers that when you add the two numbers prior to the third, you get the third. So starting with 0, you get 0 plus 1 is 1. And then if you add the 1 plus 1, you get 2. Then if you add the 1 plus 2, you get 3. If you add the 2 plus 3, you get 5, and so on. The professor had us then start to explore those numbers in shapes. So we put a 1 by 1 box by a 1 by 1 box, and you could fit a 2 by 2 box beside that one. From there, he had us then unpack this rectangle, which is called the golden ratio, by connecting all of the corners of the box, and we got this beautiful spiral. And then the professor said, well, where have you seen this before? And that's when it started to click. That spiral is in seashells. It's in the packaging of sunflower seeds. It's in the ribs or those wings of a pine cone. It's also in your skin pores. It's in your ear. It's in the way that the universe is expanding from the Big Bang. It is a ubiquitous shape in nature, this Fibonacci spiral. And so this young engineering student who had been trained to use math and science to re-engineer the environment had a paradigm shift, had an aha moment that has never left him and led me to where I am today. In that moment, I realized that it might be nature that could teach us about math. And building from that, it might be nature that could teach us more about design. At that moment, I started to unpack it a little bit further. I found a book called Cat's Paws and Catapults, which helps answer some of those unanswered questions you had as a child, like how can a cat jump so high or an ant carry so much load? It gave the engineering behind it, which was really fascinating, and then only allowed me to deepen my obsession with nature as a design entity or as a design textbook. From there, I found a woman named Janine Benyus. She's the woman who wrote the book Biomimicry, Innovation Inspired by Nature. And she's also the one who coined the term biomimicry. So upon reading her book, I found out that they did biomimicry excursions out in Costa Rica, and I thought that that's probably not a bad idea to go to Costa Rica for a vacation and then learn about this game-changing methodology and mindset. So in Costa Rica, I worked with Janine and her business partner, Dana Baumeister, and started to really see biomimicry in practice. We had naturalists walk us through the jungle and help us look at a tree, not just as a tree as I used to think, but as a system that is pumping water without electricity or any mechanical devices. It's pumping water 300 feet in the air. I'm looking at new materials like an armadillo who can make an incredible shell using benign chemistry, using manufacturing processes that don't use high temperatures and pressures like humans tend to. We looked at spider webs and the fascination that this is one of the strongest materials. In fact, it's stronger than any material that humans have made, but it does so using only the energy of the sun at body temperature and body pressure, and it's fully recyclable. In fact, these spiders will often eat their silk when they're done with it. So in situ, in context, I started to see the natural world through a biomimetic lens. And again, it was like rocket fuel to an obsession, to this paradigm shift. It was fueling this feeling that there had to be a different way. I was learning that there was, and that it was outside, and then that it was the culmination of 3.8 billion years of research. It helped me realize that nature has been doing design the whole time. And in the same context as humans, we're on the same planet, dealing with the same environmental changes, but yet nature does it so differently, almost elegantly, and beautifully, and most importantly, sustainably. So from there, I continued nonstop thinking about biomimicry. I was lucky enough to teach at OCAD University. I taught the biomimicry courses there, and then eventually did a PhD in systems level biomimicry, which was really about understanding that dichotomy between us and the rest of the natural world. What made humans so different? What made us so unique about nature? And I was looking at systems level and systems resilience. And one of the big things that I got was that humans have this interesting relationship with fear and how we deal with fear. And our own brains, our brains, our mindsets, our paradigms, our assumptions, whatever you want to call it, has a dramatic influence on how we interact and relate to the rest of the natural world. So I started to unpack some of the psychology and what made humans so different. Why are our designs not so sustainable? Seeing that we're only a very young species on this planet. We've only just arrived relative to the rest of the natural world, the 3.8 billion years. And yet in that time, we've had incredible consequences. We've had incredible impacts on the rest of the natural world. I don't need to name the stats. I think we all know that climate change, the environmental degradation, the loss of species, the acidification of our seas, the garbage piles. I mean, I laugh, but I think it's just pretty incredible how much we've impacted the world in a negative way. Yes, we're an incredibly powerful species. We've been able to do things no other species has done, but we've also done it at the cost of perhaps our own nests. And so I'm very fascinated in that. What is it that causes that dichotomy or that separation between us and the rest of the natural world? My PhD then led me to Biomimicry Frontiers. I didn't mean to be an entrepreneur, and I didn't mean to start a business. It just sort of flowed into space. I tried applying to engineering jobs after finishing my PhD with no luck. And it's just kind of met the right people at the right time who supported me or supported the vision of me continuing to practice and explore this methodology. So Biomimicry Frontiers was born out of this desire to want to practically apply some of this thinking. I say often my dad's a very practical man. He comes from a farming background, and I remember after my PhD, he wanted to see biomimicry. He said, "Show me biomimicry," and that's been a constant inspiration. Is an idea is only good when it's applied or when it's communicated. And I find that ideas are best communicated through application. So I created Biomimicry Frontiers in the hopes of showing biomimicry, but more so in the hopes of really mitigating climate change. That's the fundamental goal, is how can we use Biomimicry Frontiers to bridge that glaring contrast, to bring us back into nature in a way that is not perhaps what you think. It's one that's inspired by the natural world, one that is using the principles of nature and using the mindset, or what I call our inner biomimicry. So very luckily, we've been able to apply this to land development plans, architecture. We've designed a home in India. We've applied biomimicry technologies. We've worked with businesses and business strategies, how to make a more sustainable or resilient organization. And now we're working with individuals through our online courses called Inspired by Nature, trying to create more resilient individuals who can tap into the mindset of biomimicry, who can tap into their own inner biomimicry, but also use the methods and the tools to practically harness these ideas that are abstracted from nature. That's something that we've been able to accomplish and really dig into through our consulting, is practically applying ideas that are inspired by nature. So the courses and the platform that we're creating is a space to support others in doing the same, all in the effort to mitigate climate change. If more of us are thinking through a biomimetic lens, I think we're going to have a better chance of continuing our species. And to me, I've got a vested interest in that. I'm not interested in shutting down shop here. So that's a little bit about me. That's a little bit about why this podcast exists and the journey that we're going to go on. In these 12 episodes, I want to talk to those who are really pushing the boundary of what we know about nature. I want to talk to Indigenous elders who have, in my experience, in my good fortune, I've been able to meet quite a few Indigenous elders and Indigenous knowledge holders who have shown me a deeper way of understanding biomimicry. As the elder who married my wife and I, she said, Jamie, when she found out what I did and that I was working in biomimicry, she said to me, well, Jamie, we've been doing biomimicry for thousands of years. And I think there's a real sense of humility as a white settler on this land, relatively new here, and somebody who's been disconnected perhaps from his traditions and cultures, perhaps living in an urbanized and engineered environment for a little bit too long. I feel like that has a strong, almost sting, realizing that the Indigenous people who have been on Turtle Island for thousands of years, living in relative harmony with it, may be a part of the gatekeepers to this knowledge, to this paradigm that I'm so fascinated by. And I say this on a day with incredible reflection and sadness in many ways, finding out that today another burial site was found in Canada at a residential school, or at a formal residential school site, where over 700 bodies were found. And this builds on the story that was found just less than a month ago, where over 200 school children's bodies were found at another residential school. And if you don't know about residential schools, they were a government-sanctioned system to essentially eradicate or the Indigenous way of life. It was an attempt to assimilate them into our world. And by our, I mean white settlers, colonialists. And to do it through a means that seems pretty traumatic, pretty dramatic too. So I'm not going to talk too much about that, but I will say that this podcast is an exploration in somewhat reconciliation, realizing that the Indigenous people that we have buried, that we have tried to bury, both culturally and physically, may actually be the knowledge keepers to how to sustainably thrive on this planet, and may be the gatekeepers to a biomimetic mindset that could fundamentally shift the way that we think, behave, and create. And that when we do that, when we can look at our own paradigms, look at our assumptions, and look at the ways that we view the world, we may actually start to realize that how we think, behave, and create is not symbiotic, is not in harmony with the rest of the natural world. But if we start to take on a biomimicry mindset, if we start to work on our inner biomimicry, as we call it, and shift the paradigm, shift the lens, then we might start to create technologies, businesses, individuals, communities, systems that work for the greater good. Everything in nature seems to be working towards creating more conditions conducive to life. That's the goal. That's the fundamental principle in biomimicry, is how do we create conditions conducive to more life? And I believe, and what I want to explore in this podcast, is that it all starts with the mindset. It all starts with how we think, because how we think informs how we act, behave, and create. All right, that's it for now. That's a little intro into me, into this podcast, and I can't wait to get going and explore this further. So stay tuned.